New Year's Eve, a time for celebration, for joy, for raucous laughter and shared moments of hope. Not for me. Not this year. This year, I was alone, driving, the desolate ribbon of highway stretching before me. The radio crackled, spitting out static and the occasional burst of a forgotten song. I switched it off, the silence somehow more comforting. My reasons for being on that road, in the dead of night, are my own. Suffice it to say, I was running. Not from anyone, not exactly, more like running from myself, from the ghosts of bad decisions and missed opportunities. The car hummed beneath me, a low and steady drone. I rolled down the window, hoping for a blast of crisp, clean air. Instead, I was met with a stillness that was almost unnerving. No wind, no distant sounds of life, not even the rustle of leaves. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath. I could practically feel the weight of the impending new year pressing down on me. Each mile marker that flashed by felt like another tick of the clock. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. The headlights cut through the darkness, creating a tunnel of illumination in the vast emptiness. Beyond that narrow cone of light, shadows danced and twisted, taking on menacing shapes. I tried to focus on the road, but my gaze kept being drawn back to the periphery. The road unfurled before me, a seemingly endless asphalt serpent. There were no other cars in sight, no sign of life whatsoever. It was as though I was the last man on Earth driving towards some unknown destination. The isolation was both exhilarating and terrifying, a mix of freedom and vulnerability. I had always considered myself a rational man, a man of logic and reason, but out here on this desolate stretch of highway, logic seemed to hold little sway. My senses felt heightened, every rustle of leaves taking on amplified significance. It was as though the veil between the real and the imagined was thinning. The loneliness was starting to get to me, seeping into my bones like the cold night air. I found myself talking out loud, just to hear the sound of my own voice. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just my imagination running wild. But deep down a primal fear was starting to take root. The first sign that something was amiss was subtle. A flicker of movement in the rearview mirror that I couldn't quite place. I glanced back, but there was nothing there, just the empty road stretching out behind me. I tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to fatigue. But as the miles ticked by, the feeling persisted, a nagging sense of unease. The temperature inside the car seemed to drop, and I felt a cold draft. The silence, once comforting, now felt oppressive. The rhythmic hum of the engine seemed to take on a sinister tone. I found myself holding my breath, listening intently. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, a whiff of something stale and unpleasant. It seemed to come and go, carried on the breeze. I tried to ignore it, but the smell grew stronger, more pungent. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. It was as if someone or something was watching me. The trees loomed like gnarled sentinels, their branches skeletal fingers. But there was nothing there, just the relentless night. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever. I thought about turning back, finding a town, a diner, but something kept me moving forward. The silence deepened, pressing in on me. The only sounds were my heart and breath. I felt a strange pressure in my ears. The world outside seemed to warp and distort. Then, in the distance, I saw it. A faint glow flickering in the darkness. It was a pale, ethereal light. It beckoned me forward, promising answers. My foot hovered over the brake pedal, torn between fleeing and the unknown. The light pulsed in the distance, a rhythmic ebb and flow that seemed to mirror the frantic beating of my heart. Fear warred with curiosity, a silent battle raging within the confines of my car. My foot remained glued to the accelerator, drawn inexorably towards that enigmatic glow. Logic screamed at me to turn back, to find a well-lit gas station, a place of warmth and human contact. But something primal, something ancient and buried deep within my being urged me forward. It was as though the light had a will of its own, whispering promises of revelation, of secrets long forgotten. As I drew closer, the light grew in intensity, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and writhed along the edges of the road. The trees, once silent sentinels, now seemed to sway and moan in the presence of something unearthly. The air grew heavy, thick with anticipation and a cloying sweetness that stung my nostrils. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my overactive imagination fueled by the isolation and the late hour. But even as I tried to rationalize the situation, a cold dread settled over me, chilling me to the bone. I was nearing something beyond my understanding, something that filled me with equal parts fascination and terror. The first tendrils of fog snaked across the asphalt, pale fingers reaching out from the darkness that lay ahead. It rolled in swiftly, silently, blanketing the road in an ethereal mist that clung to everything it touched. Visibility dropped to mere feet, the world outside my windshield reduced to a swirling vortex of gray and black. The fog seemed to amplify the silence, swallowing the hum of my engine and the rasp of my own breath. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting with bated anticipation for what was to come. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as though unseen eyes were watching my every move. The light, once a distant beacon, now loomed large, diffused and distorted by the swirling mist. It took on an otherworldly quality, shimmering and shifting like a mirage. I could no longer tell how far away it was, or even if it was moving. It felt as though it was drawing me in, beckoning me deeper into its mysterious embrace. Fear turned my throat to sandpaper, making it impossible to swallow. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my body tense with a primal instinct to either flee or fight. But flee from what? And fight what? The fog seemed to hold all the answers, yet it guarded its secrets jealously. Through the swirling gray, a shape began to emerge. It was a darker smudge against the fog, a fleeting impression. The shape solidified into a human figure. It stood motionless in the middle of the road. The light emanated from the figure, casting an eerie glow. I could make out no details, only a tall, slender silhouette. My foot hovered over the brake pedal. Was it a real person? Had they wandered out into the middle of this desolate road? Or was it something else entirely? Something not of this world. A wave of cold washed over me. My heart pounded against my ribs. The figure remained motionless, barring my path. Fear, raw and primal, seized me in its icy grip. My foot slammed on the brake pedal, the screech of tires a jarring counterpoint to the oppressive silence that had descended upon the road. The car skidded to a halt, the smell of burning rubber filling the air. Still, the figure did not move. It stood there, unyielding, as though daring me to approach. My breath caught in my throat, my chest constricting with a terror so profound that it bordered on the physical. Every instinct screamed at me to throw the car into reverse and flee back into the relative safety of the darkness. But I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a morbid fascination that warred with my better judgment. The figure remained still, its back to me, shrouded in that ethereal light. I strained to make out any details, any clue as to its identity or its purpose. But the fog, like a jealous lover, clung to its form, obscuring it from my view. My gaze darted back and forth between the figure and the road behind me, torn between the urge to flee and the inexplicable pull that kept me anchored to the spot. Time seemed to stretch and distort, seconds feeling like minutes, minutes like hours. The only sounds were the frantic thumping of my own heart and the ragged rasp of my breath, amplified in the unnerving silence. A wave of dizziness washed over me and I realized I was hyperventilating. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths, trying to regain some semblance of control over my racing heart and jumbled thoughts. But the fear remained, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach that refused to be untied. I considered honking the horn, trying to startle the figure, to elicit some kind of response that would shed light on its intentions, but something held me back. A primal instinct whispered that to do so would be to invite its attention, to acknowledge its presence in a way that could have unforeseen and potentially disastrous consequences. The fog showed no signs of abating. It swirled and eddied around the car, a thick, impenetrable curtain that cut me off from the outside world. I was trapped, alone with this enigmatic figure and the growing sense of dread that coiled tighter and tighter around my chest. I glanced at the car door, my hand hovering over the handle. Could I outrun it? Could I make it back to the relative safety of my car if it proved to be hostile? Or would any attempt at escape be futile, only serving to provoke a confrontation I wasn't sure I could win? Adrenaline surged through my veins, jolting me out of my paralysis. I had to make a decision, and fast. My logical mind screamed at me to turn back, to get out of there while I still could, but some deep-seated curiosity or perhaps a morbid sense of fatalism, compelled me to confront the unknown. With a deep breath, I steeled myself and reached for the door handle. My fingers closed around the cold metal, slick with condensation. For a split second I hesitated, my heart pounding against my ribs like a caged animal. Then, with a mix of fear and determination, I threw open the door and stepped out into the fog. The night air hit me like a physical blow, cold and damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth and something else, something ancient and faintly metallic. I took a tentative step forward, my shoes crunching on the gravel shoulder of the road. The figure remained motionless, its back still to me, shrouded in that eerie light. "Hello?" My voice sounded small and weak, even to my own ears, swallowed by the fog and the oppressive silence that hung heavy in the air. There was no response. The figure did not move. It was as though it hadn't heard me, or perhaps it simply chose not to acknowledge my presence. Silence. Heavy, absolute, deafening. The fog muffled every sound, every rustle, every distant owl's hoot. My own ragged breaths echoed strangely in my ears. The figure remained unmoved, a ghostly sentinel carved from shadow and mist. I took another step, my feet crunching on the gravel shoulder. Still, no response. Fear, though still a cold fist around my heart, began to give way to a strange sense of resolve. I had come this far, faced down the terror that had rooted me to my car seat, and I would not be cowed now. Taking a deep breath, I called out again, my voice stronger this time. "Who are you? What do you want?" The words hung in the air, but still, there was no reply. The figure remained unmoved, a statue hewn from darkness and fog. I took another step, closing the distance between us. And then it moved, slow at first, a barely perceptible shift of weight. Then, with a swiftness that belied its earlier stillness, the figure turned. It wasn't the face of a monster, not in the traditional sense. The horror of that face lay in its very ordinariness, mimicking human features while existing in a space utterly devoid of life. The eyes were two dark pits devoid of light or recognition. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet in my haste to put some distance between us. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape its cage. The figure tilted its head to the side as if regarding me with a detached curiosity. Its grin widened, revealing teeth too long, too sharp like shards of yellowed glass. The fog began to dissipate, revealing the figure in all its ghastly glory. It was taller than I'd initially thought, towering over me like a skeletal wraith. The air grew colder still, the temperature plummeting to an almost unbearable degree. My mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Terror had stolen my voice, choked it down into the depths of my being. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to break free from the paralysis that held me captive. The figure took a step toward me and I could smell it then, a foul stench of decay and something akin to burnt ozone. Its grin widened, revealing more of those impossibly sharp teeth. I tried to speak, to plead for my life, but the words wouldn't come. Survival instinct, that primal urge that resided deep within the lizard brain, finally kicked in. Turning on my heel, I ran. I didn't look back, didn't dare to see if the figure was pursuing me. The adrenaline surged through my veins, lending speed to my flight. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, feel the burn in my lungs, but I didn't slow down. The fear of what lay behind me spurred me onward. "Run!" a voice screamed in my head. "Run for your life!" The fog, thick as cotton, swallowed everything but the dim glow of my taillights. I didn't dare turn my head, couldn't bear to see if it was gaining on me. The road, uneven and treacherous, became my only focus. Every route, every pothole, was a potential pitfall. Fear kept me upright, my legs churning, my lungs burning with exertion. There was only the road, the fog, and the bone-chilling certainty that something evil was on my trail. My legs screamed for respite, my lungs burned with each desperate gasp of air, but I pushed on. The world contracted to the rhythmic thud of my own heartbeat. My foot caught on something unseen, sending a jolt of pain shooting up my leg. I stumbled, my arms flailing wildly as I struggled to regain my balance. Panic surged through me, hot and desperate. I scrambled back to my feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in my ankle. And then, through the swirling gray, a beacon of hope. Distant lights, faint but unmistakable, cut through the oppressive darkness. Hope, sharp and exhilarating, surged through me, lending fresh strength to my weary limbs. I stumbled towards those lights, my pace quickening. The fog began to thin, slowly, reluctantly. A diner, a beacon of warmth and humanity in the vast emptiness of the night. Don't look back. The words echoed in my head, a mantra of self-preservation. Fear, a constant companion now, propelled me forward. My lungs screamed for air, my legs burned with exertion, but I didn't dare slow down. The sounds of the diner grew louder now, the sizzle of burgers, the murmur of conversation. It was a beacon, a promise that the world I knew still existed. The diner door, a rectangle of warm light, loomed before me. I stumbled towards it, my hand outstretched, fingers brushing against the cool glass. With a surge of adrenaline, I fumbled for the handle, throwing my weight against the door. It swung open, and I tumbled into the diner, the warmth and light washing over me. Gasping for breath, I leaned heavily against the door, my back pressing against the cool glass. All that mattered was that I was safe. The diner owner, a burly man with a kind face, helped me to a booth. I sank gratefully onto the red vinyl seat, my body trembling with exhaustion and residual fear. He brought me a cup of coffee, its warmth spreading through me like a balm. I sat there for a long time sipping the coffee, my gaze fixed on the door. Eventually I managed to stammer out my story, my voice shaky. The fog may have receded, but the memory of that night would stay with me. The drive home was a blur. Every shadow seemed to hold the promise of the figure, every rustle of leaves a whispered threat. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the deserted highway. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, my gaze darting nervously to the rearview mirror. The radio blasted static, a cacophony of white noise. The only option was forward, towards the supposed sanctuary of home. The following days were a blur of unease and hypervigilance. Every corner I turned, every shadow that flickered sent a jolt of fear through me. I saw its face in every crowd, heard its whisper in the wind. Sleep became a torturous dance with the specter of that night. fitful naps punctuated by heart-stopping nightmares. I would wake in a cold sweat, my heart pounding like a drum. The world had been irrevocably tilted on its axis. Logic and reason seemed like distant acquaintances. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred. I tried to tell myself it was just a hallucination, but deep down, I knew the truth. What I had seen was real, and it was out there, waiting for its next opportunity. The eyes, those damned eyes. They haunted me more than anything. Two bottomless pits of darkness, devoid of light, devoid of life, reflecting nothing back but my own terror. I saw them everywhere I looked, in the reflection of shop windows, in the headlights of oncoming cars, even in the blank stare of my own reflection in the mirror. I tried to forget, to bury the memory of that night deep within the recesses of my mind, but it refused to be silenced. It lingered like a phantom limb, a constant throbbing ache that no amount of willpower or distraction could alleviate. I sought solace in the mundane, in the routines and rituals of everyday life, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy, some anchor to reality. But the fear followed me, a shadow that clung to my heels, a constant reminder that the world was not as safe, not as predictable as I had once believed. The laughter of children grated on my nerves, their carefree joy a stark contrast to the gnawing anxiety that had become my constant companion. Social gatherings were unbearable, the forced smiles and idle chatter feeling like a grotesque charade, a flimsy facade masking the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of it all. The fog too lingered, not the literal fog, though the memory of it, thick and cloying, was still vivid in my mind. No, this was a different kind of fog, a mental fog that clouded my thoughts, that made it difficult to focus, to concentrate, to even hold a coherent conversation. My work suffered, my relationships deteriorated. I withdrew into myself, becoming a recluse in my own life, haunted by the memory of that night, by the chilling certainty that what I had seen was not meant for mortal eyes. I tried to explain it to others, to share the burden of that night, but words failed me. How do you articulate the indescribable? How do you convey the sheer terror, the bone-deep chill, of coming face to face with something that defied all logic, all reason, all that we hold to be true about the world and our place in it? I was met with skepticism, with pity, with well-meaning but ultimately useless advice to just forget about it or seek professional help. But I knew that some things once seen can never be unseen. Some wounds once inflicted never truly heal. The fog had seeped into my very being, and I feared it would never fully dissipate. Driven by a desperate need for answers, for some semblance of understanding, I threw myself into research. I scoured libraries, delved into dusty archives, spent countless hours online, poring over accounts of paranormal activity, of ghostly encounters, of ancient legends and folklore. I became a scholar of the unknown, a student of the shadows, seeking some explanation, some rationalization for the horror I had witnessed. I devoured books on demonology, on cryptozoology, on the history of the occult, hoping to find some precedent, some point of reference that would make sense of the impossible. But the more I learned, the more I realized the futility of my quest. The world of the paranormal, like the fog that had shrouded that desolate road, was vast, unknowable, and ultimately unforgiving. It offered glimpses of truth, tantalizing hints of something beyond our comprehension, but never a complete picture, never a definitive answer. If anything, my research only deepened the mystery, adding layer upon layer of complexity, of ancient lore and terrifying possibilities that only served to amplify my sense of dread. The fog, once a singular event, a terrifying anomaly, now seemed like a doorway, a portal to a realm of darkness that stretched far beyond the confines of my The encounter on that fog-choked road had changed me. I was no longer the same man who had set out on that New Year's Eve drive, seeking solace in solitude. I had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back, and in that exchange, something fundamental within me had shifted, had broken, perhaps even shattered beyond repair. The world seemed different now, sharper, colder, somehow less substantial. The mundane routines of everyday life, once a source of comfort, now felt hollow, meaningless. The laughter of children, once a source of joy, now sent shivers down my spine, a chilling reminder of the innocence that I had lost, the innocence that had been stolen from me on that desolate stretch of highway. I carried the memory of that night with me like a brand, a searing reminder of the fragility of my own existence, of the thin veil that separated the world I knew from the darkness that lay just beyond. I was haunted by the knowledge that there were things in this world, ancient, powerful, and utterly indifferent to human suffering, that lurked just beyond the reach of our perception, waiting for their moment to strike. I don't know what the future holds. Part of me hopes that time will dull the sharp edges of that memory, that the fog will eventually dissipate, leaving me with nothing but a chilling anecdote, a campfire story to share on dark and stormy nights. But deep down, I know that some encounters leave an indelible mark, a scar on the soul that no amount of time or therapy can erase. The road ahead stretches before me, long and uncertain, but one thing is for sure: I will never look at a fog-choked highway the same way again. Every twist and turn in the road will hold the promise of its return, every shadow a potential hiding place for the thing that haunts my dreams, my waking hours, my very existence. The fog may have lifted, but the chill remains, and I have a feeling it always will. For I have looked into the abyss, and the abyss has marked me as its own.